Hi, it's Stephen Phillips here at Ginfo, and welcome to this latest clip in which we're going to cover ESG information. Now, last month, I had the great pleasure of welcoming Leon Saunders-Calvert to come along and to give his reflections on what's going on in this space. Now, Leon is product manager at ESG Book, and he brings with him a great deal of experience of working with information managers down the years in a variety of roles. And so he was able to really tailor his talk to the needs of the audience and to give Ginfo subscribers really great insights into what they need to be thinking about when it comes to ESG information. Now, the full conversation is actually available to our subscribers at ginfo.com, together with a short report which captures all of the key concepts. And we've actually then augmented that with some of the key sources that information managers might want to consider if they're being asked to explore the world of ESG information. Now, in this clip, we just extracted 2 or 3 concepts that Leon talks about. We're going to dive straight into that in a moment. But in effect, he's going to firstly talk about the concept of greenwashing. Then he's going to talk a little bit about the size of the market for ESG information and how that's developed over the years. And then finally, he's going to give some reflections and some insights into ESG scores and ESG ratings and the difference between them and why you need to know those differences. So if you enjoy this video, please like, share and subscribe. And now I think we should just roll the tape.
But again, I'd also emphasize greenwashing exists, but it's a bit more complicated than most people think. And I would tend to sort of identify there's out and out greenwashing, which is deliberately lying about what you're doing and putting that in your company report. And that is also called fraud, irrespective of whether that data point was audited. You can't put it in your company report if you know it's not true and it can be proven to be not true. Because greenwashing can be a little bit easily thrown around, but actually is a little bit harder to identify where it's happening and where it's not. Fundamentally, the fundamental principles must always be around transparency. Are you transparent in terms of what you're trying to do? If you're saying that you're a low carbon fund, then probably picking stocks which are low carbon is good. If you're saying you're a decarbonization fund, that's actually a slightly different thing. You probably want to pick high carbon stocks which are decarbonizing rapidly. But transparency around what your investment strategy is, and then transparency around what holdings you have which align to that, is probably the key. Of course, there's this question mark around what's the growth rate of ESG look like in the markets, and actually, really interestingly, AUM associated with ESG continues to rise year on year. The market data spend on ESG has continued to rise year on year. It has slowed because a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, the market was growing at something like 30% a year. And now it's only something trivial like 10 or 15% a year, if you see what I mean. So it's still very, very significant growth, but it has slowed. I think as large as the market matures, but also because it's not linear everywhere. So in the US, of course, you've actually still got immense amount of adoption by especially sophisticated buy-side asset managers, collecting a lot of data and using a lot of that to create a lot of AUM. But of course they're doing it with more care, and they're typically not calling those things ESG. And to the degree they're talking about any thematic issue, they're talking about climate, and they're focusing on climate rather than ESG more broadly, because it's easier to identify the sort of financial implications and correlations associated with that. So there are some specific dynamics, but part of the ongoing growth is obviously driven by regulation both of financial institutions, investment banks having to do climate stress testing, asset managers having to report against SFDR, and probably soon a US SEC fund labeling program. And in Asia, similar adoption from places like Singapore of a taxonomy which looks extremely like the EU taxonomy with some adaptations and so on and so forth. And at the corporate level, the EU is still leading the way, but at the corporate level, the CSRD and ISSB, all these acronyms. I mean, ESG is the land of acronyms, right? But sort of corporate level reporting as well as financial institutional level reporting, all driving the need to adopt ESG considerations and understand ESG data. And so hence why, despite the sort of slightly getting caught up in the culture wars in the US, the demand for data and the adoption and integration of data into financial practice has actually not declined and continues to grow. And then you've got scores and ratings, and I tend to differentiate between the two, but a lot of the industry thinks that they're the same thing, and there isn't a good. My differentiation is not necessarily agreed upon by everyone, but I think it's useful distinction. Ratings I tend to think of about as being analyst led. In other words, they are informed by an opinion, ideally an expert opinion, around the sustainability credentials therein of a given company. Whereas an ESG score tends to be, if you like, automatically derived based on a rules-based methodology.
We're back to qualitative versus quantitative almost.
Exactly. So if you think about, if you've got all the right data on a company and you've got the robustness and you've got clear understanding of the methodology, then you can arrive at what that company's score will be, if you like, versus an analyst rating, which is, well, you won't ever arrive at that unless you're lucky, because essentially they're just looking at that company in the round with the data they have, but with their opinion about the company and so on and so forth, and they're coming out with their own view, a bit like a sell-side research analyst would, looking at, whether you should buy or sell or hold a stock, right? And actually there's value in those things not agreeing. People don't expect all sales or research analysts to say the same thing. It probably wouldn't be very useful if they did.